The Americans are taking over national team basketball. And this isn't about Team USA. I'm rather talking about all these American basketball players becoming Asian, European, or African country citizens. Let's see why it's happening so much more in the last few decades and try to answer the question: is naturalization a good or a bad thing for FIBA basketball? First of all, maybe it would be helpful to know what naturalization in FIBA is and how it works. Okay, so there's the obvious and most common case when you just have one nationality and are eligible to play for your national team. Then there's the case of players with dual citizenships whose parents moved out of their homeland. They can still be considered as a regular national team members as long as they haven't played for the other country in youth tournaments after turning 17 years old. Otherwise, the guys who have played for someone else can still play, but now only as naturalized players. But here's the thing, in many cases you don't have to have some sort of a bloodline connection with a country to get a second citizenship. For example, where I'm from in Lithuania, our government is really strict with giving out or allowing dual citizenships, and they went as far as to take away Big Z's Žydrūnas Ilgauskas Lithuanian citizenship after he obtained an American one. But again, that's just my petty government at the time. In most other countries, nobody really cares as much, and guys who literally have absolutely no connection with a country are getting citizenships left and right. When I say no connection, I mean it. For some of these Americans, going to sign the citizenship papers is their first ever visit to that country.
That was whenever I came. It was probably the first time I came to Croatia too.
Anyways, I think it's also important to talk about why I'm so focused on the Americans in this video. Well, first of all, Americans make up 100% of FIBA Africa naturalizations, 85% of Asian ones, and 144 out of 156 naturalizations in Europe are of American players. Don't get me wrong here, I understand that the US is a young country that is made up of immigrants, and a decent percentage of these guys have at least some kind of a connection. But I can tell you without a doubt that, for example, these 8 Americans who played for Azerbaijan have no connection to that country whatsoever, and that's only one example of many. I should also make it clear that FIBA allows teams to have only one naturalized player per game, which has led us to some peculiar situations. Take the 2025 Eurobasket qualifiers, where we saw the same Azerbaijan's national team have Partizan's Zach Lidey play a game against Switzerland, but then, due to some prior agreements, leave the team and have Monaco's Dante Hall replace him for another match. Yeah, there were circumstances to explain it, but at the same time, these countries are just testing out different Americans to see who fits better. Another similar example was before the 2023 World Cup, when Slovenia was testing between Jordan Morgan and Mike Tobey to fill their center spot. Now, how is that not the same thing as signing a free agent for a club team? Before we go into the actual numbers, a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, Hostinger. Hostinger is a go-to for all things concerning websites, from their AI-powered website builder to other AI tools allowing you to compose SEO-friendly copy or create a logo. Besides, you can get your web hosting with them, and the best part is that your custom domain comes free of charge. So go ahead, create a professional website quickly, and get an additional 10% discount for all hosting plans using our code BNEWS10. Alright, so I said in the intro that naturalization has been happening much more frequently in the last few decades, but how much more exactly? Let's look at the data. The number of naturalized players in FIBA Asia, Europe, and Africa has dramatically increased after 2010. When I say dramatically, I'm talking about it happening 4 or 5 times more in twice as less time. Specifically, from 2010 until 2024, FIBA Asia saw an increase from 12 to 64 naturalized players, FIBA Europe from 34 to 122, and FIBA Africa from 3 to 24. And that's in the span of just 14 years. This quadrupling of naturalized players has been significant in national team compositions, and it's becoming clear now that it's not only those smaller basketball nations seeking Americans anymore. Previously, you would have countries with no basketball talent seek out naturalized players to at least be somewhat competitive. Nowadays, that's still happening, but now countries with strong basketball traditions, such as Greece or Spain have naturalized American players with no Greek or Spanish roots. This change could be partially attributed to the modifications in the FIBA tournament landscape. In 2011, FIBA Eurobasket expanded their number of participating teams from 16 to 24, while in the 2019 FIBA World Cup the number went from 24 to 32. This increased pressure on nations to assemble competitive squads, but obviously there is more to it. Let's look at it from the perspectives of both the countries and the players. For national teams, the primary motivation is to fill gaps in their rosters. Take the examples of Greece and Spain, both of which have naturalized American point guards Thomas Walkup and Lorenzo Brown respectively. These players were not just added to the teams for their talent, but were specifically chosen to address positional needs that could not be filled by local talent at the time. Walkup's acquisition was a bit more understandable since the Texan had played in Greece for over 2 years before becoming Greek citizen in 2023. Lorenzo's case was met with much more backlash, mostly because Brown had never played for a Spanish club and only became a citizen because of Sergio Scariolo, who had coached him in Toronto Raptors. Regardless, both of these countries historically had a great selection of guards, and the fact that both went for an American point guard had a lot of European basketball fans disappointed. On the players' side, there are equally attractive incentives pushing them to become naturalized. These days, more and more American basketball players are willing to move out of the US and seek a professional career overseas. Obtaining a European passport through naturalization is a significant advantage for those Americans. It allows them to sign more lucrative contracts with European clubs, as they no longer count against the foreign player limits imposed by many domestic leagues. Additionally, living and working in Europe becomes simpler with the European passport, making the prospect of naturalization attractive for both personal and professional reasons. Now, just before I present my opinion on whether naturalization is a good or bad thing for FIBA basketball, just a friendly reminder to be subscribed to our channel, as we're giving away that Giannis jersey once we hit 150,000 subs and choose a random lucky winner. Alright, so is it good or bad? If only life was this simple, huh? I believe there are valid arguments on both sides. The critics would argue that the practice of naturalizing players who have little to no cultural or ancestral connection to the country they represent undermines the traditional concept of national teams. National teams, in this view, should embody the country's heritage, culture, and identity, and simply it really should reflect on the state of basketball in that specific country. When teams are composed of players who are naturalized purely for their ability, it really dilutes national pride and the meaningfulness of these international competitions. There's another concern that reliance on naturalized players might hinder the development of local talent. One thing is, it is kind of harder for kids to relate to a foreigner rather than someone with a name that resembles theirs, which could impact the motivation. Another point is that young athletes in the country, in theory, are getting fewer opportunities to represent their nation and can be overshadowed by imported talent. The result of that is potentially stunting the growth of the sport domestically and only deepening the problem. On the other hand, supporters of naturalization point out the benefits it brings to the competitiveness and the quality of international basketball. For smaller nations or those with less developed basketball programs, naturalized players can elevate the team's performance, making competitions more exciting and unpredictable. This not only boosts the team's chances in international tournaments, but in some cases also increases the interest and investment in basketball within the country, which can in turn support the development of the sport locally. From the player's perspective, naturalization offers opportunities that might not be available otherwise. Take American basketball players. First of all, there are so many talented players coming from the States, but you only have 12 spots on Team USA's roster, which in any case most oftenly are all taken by top NBA guys, and if you're not in the league, then there's absolutely no chance. Naturalization allows these guys to showcase their skills on the international stage, growing as athletes and earning better contracts too. In this globalized world where we exchange talent, skills, and everything else across the borders, sports and basketball specifically could be no exception. And just to add to that, the blend of cultures and backgrounds on a national team can also be viewed as a positive reflection of our more and more interconnected world. But when it comes comes to me, I have quite a nuanced but one-sided opinion on this. National team basketball has to have that uniqueness that sets it apart from club basketball. With teams naturalizing players, even if it's just one per team, it loses that beauty. I understand that the level of basketball increases this way, and I didn't mind when North Macedonia naturalized Bo McCaleb to create a miracle in 2011. But when we start seeing these basketball powerhouse countries filling their gaps with quote-unquote free agents, that's what bothers me. Ultimately, this discussion is wide open and I would love to read what you guys think in the comments below. As always, like this video and check out why Greek basketball has been on a downfall recently.